The first time I watched myself do something I have no memory of doing, I was eating a granola bar. That's the part that stays with me. Not the footage itself, not immediately, but the ordinary, almost insulting normalcy of the moment I pressed play. Tuesday morning, 6:47 a.m., sitting in the cramped manager's office at Lakeview Self-Storage, legs sore from 7 hours of walking concrete corridors under fluorescent light, unwrapping a Nature Valley bar and brushing crumbs off the keyboard. I was pulling up the overnight security recordings because Dale, the owner, had asked me to start spot-checking footage after someone reported a busted padlock on a unit in Building C. Routine. Administrative. The kind of task that exists to fill a box on a liability checklist. My name is Martin Voss. I'm 53 years old, and for the last 14 months I've been the sole night shift property manager at a self-storage facility on the eastern edge of Hardin County, Kentucky. The job is exactly what it sounds like. I carry keys. I walk a clipboard route. I check locks, note gate entries, make sure the lot lights stay on. Between rounds, I sit in a windowless office the size of a bathroom and watch nothing happen on a bank of 9 monitors fed by cameras, so old half of them have a permanent green tint. Before this, I drove a bread delivery truck for 19 years until the company restructured and my route was eliminated. Before that, I worked at a muffler shop my uncle owned. I have no technical training. I don't understand how the camera system writes to the hard drive. I don't understand most of the equipment I'm supposedly responsible for. I understand locks. I understand keys. I understand walking a grid until your feet go numb and writing down what you see. What I saw that Tuesday morning was Building D, Camera 7, the corridor between Units D-14 and D-22. Timestamp: 3:11 a.m. The hallway was empty. I remembered it being empty. I had walked it at 2:45 and again at 3:30, and both times there was nothing to note. The fluorescent tube above D-18 was flickering. It had been flickering for weeks. I'd written it up twice, and the corridor had that dead grey look it always had. Then, at 3:11:08, the door to Unit D-19 opened from the inside. D-19 was rented to a woman named Patricia Loomis, 61, who stored holiday decorations and her late husband's woodworking tools. It had a combination padlock I had personally verified during my 2:45 round. The door rolled upward slowly, hitching on the left track the way those doors do when the rollers need oil, and the interior was dark. For 4 seconds, nothing emerged. Then something did. It came out low. Not crawling, more like the posture of a person who has forgotten what standing looks like. Arms forward, hands flat on the concrete, spine arched upward, head hanging between the shoulders so the face pointed at the floor. It moved with a hitching, asymmetric rhythm, left side pulling, right side dragging. It wore what appeared to be a maintenance uniform. Dark green, the kind our county parks department uses. I put the granola bar down. The figure dragged itself fully into the corridor, then stopped. It stayed motionless for 11 seconds. I counted during the second viewing, and then it raised its head. The camera was 20 feet away, mounted near the ceiling, angled down the corridor's center line. The resolution was poor. The flickering tube above D-18 strobed the image, but I could see the face clearly enough to understand that what was wrong with it was not an injury. The jaw was distended, not broken, widened, as though the mandible had come unmoored from the skull and dropped an inch below its natural line. The mouth was open, the eyes caught the fluorescent light and held it. It stayed like that, head raised, face towards the camera for almost a full minute. Then it turned. Not smoothly, not the way a body turns, but in a sequence, head first, then shoulders, then hips, each section rotating independently like the segments of something jointed differently than a human being. And it pulled itself back inside Unit D-19. The door rolled down. I sat in the office at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, looking at a frozen frame of an empty corridor, and I knew two things with the kind of certainty that doesn't ask permission. The first, that had happened during my shift inside my perimeter 20 yards from my patrol route. The second, I had not heard it. I had not seen it. I had no memory of anything unusual occurring between 2:45 and 3:30 on that corridor. The granola bar sat on the desk with one bite taken out of it, and I never finished it. I did what a person does when the ground shifts. I went back and checked. I rewound the footage to 2:45 and watched myself. Clearly me. Grey jacket, clipboard, flashlight in my left hand. Walk the D corridor. Check each door. Make a note. And leave through the east fire exit at 2:51. Normal. Routine. My posture was my posture. My gait was my gait. I watched myself disappear through the door, and 12 minutes later the unit opened. I then pulled the footage from 3:30. There I was again, re-entering through the same fire exit, walking the same corridor, checking the same doors. I paused at D-19. I watched myself grip the padlock, tug it, write something on the clipboard and move on. The padlock was intact. I had tested it. According to my own logged route sheet, still sitting on the desk in front of me, I had written D-19, secured, at 3:32 a.m. But 12 minutes before that, the door had opened from the inside, and something had come out of it, and gone back in. I pulled every other camera in Building D. The east exterior camera showed nothing entering the building between my two rounds. The west camera was down. It had been down for 3 weeks. Another thing I had reported to Dale, and another thing Dale had not fixed. There was no footage of anything entering D-19 from outside, which meant either it had already been inside when I checked the door at 2:45, or it had entered through a route I couldn't see. I sat with that for a long time. The responsible thing, the obvious thing, was to call Dale. Tell him I'd found something on the footage. Let him call the police. Let them open the unit, find whatever was inside, and make it someone else's problem. That's what a property manager does. That's what the laminated emergency procedures card taped to the wall next to the first aid kit told me to do. In the event of unauthorized access, contact facility owner and local law enforcement. But I kept hearing a question I couldn't answer, and I knew anyone I called would ask it immediately. Where were you when this happened? 20 yards away, on my route, with a functioning flashlight and a clipboard and no hearing impairment and no excuse. The door to D-19 made a sound when it rolled up. Every door in every building made a sound, a grinding metallic rattle that echoed off concrete walls. I should have heard it. I should have come to investigate. On the recording, I was nowhere. If I reported the footage, I would become the first question. Not a witness. Not the person who discovered it. The person who was there and didn't respond. The person whose story didn't make sense. I could already see the shape of that conversation. You were 20 yards away and heard nothing? You checked the lock 12 minutes later and it was fine. You didn't notice anything? No, I didn't. And I couldn't explain why. I ejected the portable drive I'd been reviewing from, walked to the filing cabinet, and put it in the bottom drawer under a stack of old lease agreements. I told myself I was preserving it, keeping the evidence safe, not destroying it, just holding it, until I understood what I was looking at, until I could describe what I'd seen in language that wouldn't make me the problem. I finished my shift notes, logged the time, locked the office, and drove home. The sun was up, the road was dry. I passed a school bus loading children and a woman walking a golden retriever, and a man pressure washing his driveway, and all of it felt like a painting of a world I was standing slightly behind. I slept for 2 hours, dreamed of nothing, woke up and lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan and trying to feel the gap. The 12 minutes between 2:51 and 3:11 when something had been 20 yards from me and I had been nowhere. The gap didn't feel like anything. That was the worst part. It wasn't a void or a fog or a missing piece. It was just Tuesday. I had been doing my rounds. Nothing had happened. I was certain of that in exactly the same way the camera was certain of the opposite. I went back to work that night. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't courage. It wasn't responsibility. It was the specific, grinding need to know whether the footage was real, whether I had seen what I thought I'd seen, or whether 14 months of solitary night shifts in a concrete labyrinth had finally started to erode something. I needed to walk that corridor again. I needed to stand in front of D-19 and feel the padlock in my hand, and hear the silence and know that the building was just a building. I clocked in at 11 p.m. The facility was closed to renters. The gate was locked. I was the only person on the property. That was the job. That was always the job. Alone from 11 to 6 with nothing but the monitors and the clipboard and the particular sound your own breathing makes when it's the loudest thing in 100,000 square feet of stored possessions. I did my first round at 11:15. Building A, Building B, Building C. Normal. Then Building D. The corridor between D14 and D22 looked the same as it always looked. The fluorescent tube above D18 flickered. The concrete was clean. I walked to D19, gripped the padlock, a master combination lock, silver, cold, and tugged it. Locked. Solid. I pressed my ear to the corrugated steel door and held my breath. Nothing. I stood there for probably 2 full minutes, listening to the silence organize itself into layers, the hum of the lights, the distant ticking of the HVAC system cycling through Building B, the faint electrical buzz of the camera mounted at the far end of the corridor, the sound of my own pulse in my ears. No movement behind the door. No presence. Just the ordinary emptiness of a storage unit full of Christmas ornaments and table saws. I finished my round, logged it, sat in the office and watched the monitors. At 1 a.m., I started cycling through cameras manually, something I rarely did. Usually I let the system auto-rotate on its 10-second cycle and only paid attention if something flagged. But that night I held on camera 7, Building D, the corridor, and I watched. Nothing happened at 1 o'clock, nothing at 1:30. At 2 o'clock, I forced myself to do my second round, walking the same route, checking the same locks. D-19. Secured. I came back to the office at 2:20 and sat down in front of the monitors again. At 2:44, I fell asleep. I know this because I woke up at 4:12 with my forehead on the desk and a line of drool on my forearm and the monitors cycling through their automatic rotation like nothing had changed. I jerked upright, disoriented, panicked, not because I'd fallen asleep, that had happened before on long shifts, but because I'd lost time. 90 minutes. Gone. I grabbed the mouse and rewound camera 7 to 2:44. At 2:44, the corridor was empty. At 2:45, still empty. At 2:51, the door to D-19 opened. Same hitching roll. Same left track stutter. Same 4 seconds of darkness before something emerged. This time, there were 2 of them. The first was the figure in the maintenance uniform. Same posture, same low crawl, same dislocated jaw. The second was smaller. It came out upright, walking, but wrong. Its arms hung in front of its body rather than at its sides, wrists limp, fingers trailing, as if it were carrying something invisible and impossibly heavy. Its head was tilted so far to the right that its ear nearly touched its shoulder. It wore civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt. They moved together down the corridor toward camera 7, and I watched the timestamp count upward, 2:52, 2:53, 2:54, and then the smaller one stopped. It turned its head. The tilt shifted from right to left in a single sharp snap, and it looked at the camera. Its mouth moved. I couldn't read what it said. The resolution was too poor, the angle too steep, but the mouth moved in a deliberate pattern, not random, not a spasm. Words. It was forming words. Then both figures returned to D-19. The door rolled down. At 3:10 the corridor was empty. At 4:12 I woke up at my desk. I had been on the property. Alone. 90 minutes unaccounted for. The corridor was 20 yards from the office. And I had heard nothing, seen nothing, felt nothing. I saved the footage to the portable drive and put it in the bottom drawer with the first recording. I should have called someone. I need you to understand that I knew this. Not later, not in retrospect, but in the moment. Sitting in that office with my hands shaking, and the drive in the drawer, and the monitors cycling their indifferent rotation. I knew I should call Dale, call the police, call anyone. Say the words, something is inside Unit D-19, and I don't know what it is, and I don't know how it got there, and I need someone to come look. But the footage now contained 2 nights, 2 separate recordings of things emerging from a locked unit during my shift while I was within earshot and did nothing. Reporting it Tuesday would have made me look negligent. Reporting it Wednesday made me look complicit. Each night I waited, the story I would eventually have to tell grew worse. The drawer was becoming a burial. I started researching. Not the things themselves. I didn't have language for the things themselves, didn't even have a framework that would let me type a coherent search query. What I researched was the camera system. I spent Thursday afternoon, my day off, reading the manual for the DVR unit Dale had installed in 2019. I learned how the system wrote to the hard drive in a continuous loop, overwriting the oldest footage every 72 hours. I learned that the portable drive I'd been saving to was the only backup. I learned that by Friday night, the original Tuesday footage would be gone from the main system, overwritten by new recordings of empty corridors and locked doors. I also learned, and this detail would matter more than anything else, that the system had no capability for fabrication. It was a closed circuit, no network connection, no remote access, no software layer that could generate synthetic video. The cameras recorded what was in front of them. The DVR stored what the cameras recorded. There was no mechanism by which the footage I'd watched could exist unless the events had physically occurred in the physical space the camera observed. This eliminated the possibility I most wanted to be true. On Thursday evening, I drove to the facility during business hours, something I never did, and walked to Building D while the day manager, a college student named Aidan, was handling a customer at the front desk. I went to Unit D-19. I examined the padlock. I examined the door. I got on my knees and looked at the rubber seal along the bottom. I looked at the walls on either side. I pressed my palm flat against the corrugated steel and held it there. Cold. Still. The unit felt like every other unit. Metal and air and the faint chemical smell of stored belongings aging in unregulated temperature. I wanted to open it. The master key, the one Dale had given me for emergencies, was on my ring. I could have opened any unit on the property, but opening a renter's unit without cause or consent was a violation of the lease agreement, a potential legal liability, and exactly the kind of action that would generate questions I could not answer. Why did you open D-19? What made you suspect something was inside? The footage I hadn't reported. The footage that now existed only on a portable drive in a locked filing cabinet in an office only I occupied. I left the building. I went home. I set an alarm for 10:30 p.m. and lay on my bed without sleeping, watching daylight thin against the curtains, feeling the hours between me and my next shift compress like the space between a closing door and its frame. My ex-wife, Sandra, called at 8 p.m. We'd been divorced 7 years, but still talked occasionally. She had a way of calling when something was off, some residual attunement from 20 years of marriage that distance hadn't fully severed. She asked how I was. I said fine. She said I sounded flat. I told her I was tired. She said I was always tired. That was the problem with night shift. It ate you from the inside. She asked if I was eating. I said yes. She asked if I'd seen anyone. Friends, a doctor, anyone. I said I was fine. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You know you can tell me if something's wrong." I almost did. The words were right there. Sandra, the camera at work, recorded something coming out of a storage unit, and I was 20 yards away, and I don't remember it happening, and it's happened twice, and I don't know what the things are. But I heard how it sounded before I said it. I heard the long pause that would follow, the careful voice she'd used to ask if I'd been sleeping, the suggestion that I talk to someone, not the police, not Dale, a professional, someone who helps people who see things that aren't there, except the things were there. The camera recorded them. The camera was a closed system with no capacity for invention. "I'm fine, Sandra, just tired." I hung up and drove to work. Friday night. My third shift since Tuesday. I changed my routine. I brought a digital watch with an alarm set to vibrate every 15 minutes. A fail-safe against falling asleep, against losing time, against whatever had pulled me under on Wednesday. I drank coffee at midnight and again at 2 a.m. I walked my rounds on a tighter schedule, every 45 minutes instead of every 90. And I kept camera 7 locked on the D corridor, overriding the automatic rotation. For the first 3 hours, nothing happened. The corridor sat there, grey and flickering and empty, and I watched it the way you watch a road in a rainstorm. Not because you expect something, but because looking away feels like permission. At 2:38, my watch buzzed. I acknowledged it. I was awake. I was at the desk. My eyes were on the monitor. At 2:39, the image on camera 7 changed. Not the corridor. The corridor was the same. The change was in the lower right corner of the frame, at the edge of the camera's field of view. A shadow. Not moving, just present. A darkening along the floor near the fire exit at the far end of the hallway, as if something was standing just outside the frame. I watched the shadow for 6 minutes. It didn't move. It didn't grow. It just occupied space it hadn't occupied before. At 2:45, my watch buzzed. Time for a round. I didn't want to go. The monitor was showing me something, and I was awake, and I was watching, and if I left the office, I would lose the ability to see what happened next. But the rounds were the job. The rounds were the documentation. If I stopped walking the route, I stopped being the property manager and started being a man sitting in a dark room watching a screen, and that was a different story. A worse story if anyone ever reviewed the logs. I walked the route, a through D. I entered Building D through the east fire exit, the same door visible at the far end of camera 7, and as I pushed it open, I swept my flashlight down the corridor. Empty. No shadow. The fluorescent tube above D-18 flickered. The concrete stretched clean and grey to the opposite end. I walked the full length, checking each lock. D-19. Secured. The padlock was cold and solid and exactly where it was supposed to be. I tugged it twice, wrote it down. I finished the round in 11 minutes and returned to the office. I sat down. I looked at camera 7. The corridor was empty. I rewound the footage to the moment I'd left the office, 2:45, and watched. At 2:45, the shadow was still in the corner of the frame. At 2:46, it receded. At 2:47, the corridor was clear. At 2:48, I appeared through the fire exit, flashlight sweeping. Normal. Routine. The shadow had withdrawn less than 2 minutes before I arrived. I rewound further. I watched the shadow appear at 2:39. I watched it hold its position for 6 minutes. I watched it leave at 2:46. And then I noticed what I had not noticed in real time. At 2:41, while I was sitting in the office, while I was watching the monitor, a second shape had appeared at the opposite end of the corridor. Not at the edge of the frame, in the center, directly in front of Unit D, D-19. It was me. I was standing in the corridor in my grey jacket with my clipboard at my side, facing the camera, motionless. I was there from 2:41 to 2:44. 3 minutes, standing perfectly still in front of D-19, while I, the real I, the conscious I, sat in the office 20 yards away watching the same feed and somehow not seeing myself on it. I paused the footage. I leaned close to the monitor. The figure in the corridor was wearing my jacket. It was my height, my build, my posture. The clipboard was in the correct hand. The flashlight was clipped to the belt loop where I always kept it. But the face was turned directly towards the camera with an expression I have never made. Not fear, not blankness. Attention. The kind of fixed, focused attention you see in someone who is listening to something very carefully and understanding every word. I closed the playback window. I sat in the dark office with the monitors cycling their automatic rotation and my coffee going cold and my digital watch buzzing against my wrist every 15 minutes for the rest of the night. And I did not look at camera 7 again. I called in sick Saturday. I'd never called in sick before, not once in 14 months. Dale answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed, in the low-grade way of a man whose business model depends on one underpaid employee never missing a shift. I told him I had a stomach virus. He asked if I'd be back Sunday. I said probably. He said he'd lock the gate remotely and the property would go unmonitored. He didn't sound worried. Nothing ever happened at Lakeview Self-Storage. That was the whole point of the place. I spent Saturday in my apartment doing something I'd been avoiding. I connected the portable drive to my laptop, an old Lenovo I used mostly for email, and I watched all 3 nights of footage sequentially, from the beginning. Tuesday, one figure, low crawl, distended jaw, emergence and retreat, duration 4 minutes 31 seconds. Wednesday, 2 figures, the crawler and the upright one with the tilted head, movement toward the camera, mouth forming words. Duration 7 minutes 12 seconds. Friday, the shadow in the corner, and me, standing in the corridor during a span of time when I was certifiably, physically sitting in the office. The progression was clear, and it terrified me in a way the individual events had not. Each night, more presence. Each night, closer to the camera. Each night, more integrated into the world I was supposed to be managing. On Tuesday, the things were inside the unit. On Wednesday, they were in the corridor. On Friday, one of them was me, or wearing me, or shaped like me, or occupying the space I occupied in a version of the night I didn't experience. I paused on the Friday footage, the frame where I was standing in front of D-19, facing the camera. I enlarged it as much as the resolution allowed. The face was pixelated but recognizable. The eyes were open, the mouth was closed. The hands were at the sides. And then I noticed the clipboard. In the frozen image, the clipboard was turned outwards, facing the camera. I never held it that way. I always held it against my body, writing surface inward, the way you carry a clipboard when you're walking. But in this frame, it was reversed. And there was writing on it. Not my handwriting, not the blocky, compressed print I'd used for 14 months of route logs. This was different, smaller, denser, filling the entire visible surface of the page. I couldn't read it. The resolution dissolved the letters into grey smudges, but it was there. My double, standing in my corridor, holding my clipboard outward like a sign, showing something to the camera that I could not decipher. I closed the laptop. I went to the kitchen. I ran the faucet and filled a glass of water and drank it, and filled it again and drank it again, and stood at the sink looking at the neighbour's fence through the window above the basin, while something settled into me that was not panic and was not calm, but was the specific gravity of understanding that no one could help me with this. Not Dale, not the police, not Sandra, not a doctor. Any person I showed the footage to would see one of 2 things: evidence of a break-in that I had failed to report for 4 days, or evidence that I was losing my mind. Neither interpretation led anywhere I wanted to go. Neither interpretation was correct. I went back to the laptop. I opened the Friday footage again. I advanced it frame by frame, watching myself stand motionless in the corridor. At 2:43:44, the mouth opened. At 2:43:45, the lips moved. At 2:43:47, the mouth closed. The figure on the screen, the one wearing my face, had spoken to the camera. A single phrase, 2 seconds long, forming words I could not read through the grain of the image. I watched those 3 seconds 40 times in a row, trying to resolve the shape of the syllables. I could not. But something happened on the 41st viewing that I cannot explain and have not been able to undo. I pressed play, and the mouth opened, and the lips moved, and I understood what it said. Not read, not decoded. Understood, the way you understand a sentence spoken directly into your ear. The meaning arrived in my body before my brain processed it, landing in my stomach and my hands and the base of my skull simultaneously, and I closed the laptop and pushed back from the desk so hard the chair tipped, and I went down with it, sitting on the floor of my apartment at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, with daylight pouring through every window and my heart beating in my teeth. The thing on the screen, the thing wearing my face, had looked into the camera and said, "You were here. I went back Sunday night. I need you to understand that too. Not because I was brave, not because I'd found some reserve of professional duty or rational curiosity. I went back because the alternative was not going back, and not going back meant the footage stopped. And the footage stopping meant I would never know what was happening during the hours I couldn't account for. The recordings were the only evidence that the gap existed. Without them, I was just a tired man with a bad feeling. With them, I was at least a tired man with proof. I clocked in at 11 o'clock. The facility was dark and locked. The gate responded to my code. The office was exactly as I'd left it Thursday morning. Coffee mug in the sink, clipboard on the desk, route log open to the current week. I sat down, powered up the monitors, and locked camera 7 on the D corridor. I also did something new. I brought a second camera, a cheap trail camera I'd bought at Walmart that afternoon, the kind hunters use, motion activated with infrared. I walked to Building D before my first round and mounted it on the wall opposite camera 7, facing the same corridor from the other direction. If something appeared in front of D-19, I would have 2 angles. If something appeared that looked like me, I would be able to see its face from the front. I secured the trail camera with zip ties at 11:20. I tested it by walking through its field of view and checking the preview screen. It triggered. It recorded. The infrared illumination was invisible to the naked eye, but turned the corridor into a grey-green landscape on the camera's display. I left it armed and returned to the office. The first 3 rounds were uneventful. Midnight, 12:45, 1:30. Every lock secure. Every corridor empty. D-19 unpadlocked and silent. At 2 o'clock, I made a decision that changed everything. Instead of returning to the office after my round, I pulled a plastic chair from the break area in Building A and carried it to Building D. I set it at the far end of the corridor opposite D-19, directly beneath camera 7. I sat down with my clipboard and my flashlight and my thermos of coffee, and I decided I was going to watch the door with my own eyes for the rest of the night. If something came out, I would see it. If something wore my face, I would be there to meet it. No monitor, no playback, no mediated distance, just me and the corridor and what for the corridor contained. I sat there from 2 o'clock to 2:15 in absolute stillness. The fluorescent tube above D-18 flickered in its patient arrhythmic cycle. The HVAC ticked. My breathing echoed faintly off the walls. At 2:17, the lights went out. Not just D-18. Every light in the corridor. Every light in Building D. The darkness was instant and total. Not the gradual dimming of a power fluctuation, but the hard black of a switch thrown. I turned on my flashlight. The beam cut a clean cone down the corridor and landed on the door of D-19. The door was open. Not opening. Open. Fully rolled up, the interior of the unit, a rectangle of darkness so complete that the flashlight beam seemed to stop at the threshold rather than penetrate it. I had not heard the door move. I was 40 feet away in a silent concrete hallway, and I had not heard the corrugated steel rattle upward on its track. I stood. The chair scraped on the concrete, a sound so loud in the dead air that I flinched, and I held the flashlight steady on the open unit. "Hello?" My voice came back to me off the walls, flattened and thin. No answer from the unit. No movement. Just the open door, and the dark inside it, and the beam of my flashlight doing nothing at the threshold. I took a step forward, then another. The corridor was 40 feet long, and D-19 was at the midpoint, and each step closed the distance by a fraction that felt both too much and not enough. At 20 feet, I could see the edge of the unit's interior, the right wall corrugated steel, and against it the silhouette of stacked boxes. Patricia Loomis's Christmas decorations. Normal. At 15 feet, I could see deeper. The back wall, a folding table, something draped with a tarp. At 10 feet, the lights came back on. Every fluorescent tube in the corridor fired simultaneously, the bluish-white light slamming into my retinas after 3 minutes of darkness, and I threw my hand up reflexively, losing the flashlight beam. When my vision cleared, 2 seconds, maybe 3, the door to D-19 was closed, padlocked. I was standing 10 feet away from a locked unit that had been open 8 seconds earlier, and the lock was in place and the door was down, and the corridor was bright and empty and humming with the sound of lights doing exactly what lights are supposed to do. I went back to the office. I walked fast. I didn't run because running felt like it would break something, some thin membrane of normality that was the only thing keeping me functional. I sat down. I rewound camera 7 to 2 o'clock. I watched myself carry the chair into the corridor and sit down. I watched myself sit motionless for 17 minutes. At 2:17, the lights went out on the recording. The image shifted to the camera's low-light mode, grainy and washed. In the low-light image, I could see myself stand. I could see the beam of my flashlight. But the door to D-19 was closed. On the recording, the door never opened. I was standing in the corridor, flashlight pointed at a closed door, for 3 minutes and 12 seconds. Then the lights came back on, and I stood there for another 8 seconds looking at a closed, padlocked unit. Then I walked back towards the camera and out of frame. The camera had not recorded what I saw, or I had seen something the camera did not show. Either way, the footage and my experience had separated. They were no longer two versions of the same event. They were two different events occupying the same timestamp. I pulled the trail camera's memory card at the end of my shift and drove home to review it on my laptop. The trail camera, positioned opposite the security camera, showed the same corridor from the other direction. At 2 o'clock, it captured me entering with the chair. At 2:17, the lights went out. In the infrared image, grey-green, shadowless, I could see myself clearly, standing, flashlight raised. And on the trail camera, the door to D-19 was open. I could see into the unit. The infrared illumination penetrated where my flashlight had not. The boxes were there. The table was there. The tarp was there. And standing behind the tarp, motionless, arranged in a row against the back wall, were 7 figures. 7. Upright. Still. Their faces were turned towards the corridor, toward me, and their mouths were open. All 7 mouths, open at the same angle, the jaws lowered to the same impossible degree. They were not identical, different heights, different builds, different clothing, but the posture was uniform. The openness of the mouths was uniform. They stood in a line and faced me and did not move for the full duration of the door being open. 3 minutes and 12 seconds. 7 figures. 7 open mouths. And the security camera recording the same corridor at the same time from the opposite direction showed none of it. I closed the laptop. I sat in my kitchen with both cameras' evidence in front of me, one recording showing nothing, the other showing 7 things standing behind a tarp in a storage unit, and I understood that the question had changed. It was no longer what is inside D19. It was no longer why can't I remember. The question was, which camera was telling the truth? Or worse, what if both were? I thought about Patricia Loomis, 61 years old, holiday decorations, woodworking tools. She paid her rent quarterly, always on time, and I had never met her. She accessed her unit during business hours, and I worked nights. She was a name on a lease and a combination lock on a door and a quarterly check that cleared. I pulled up her contact information from the tenant database on my laptop. Dale kept a shared spreadsheet, one of the few digital systems he maintained. Patricia Loomis, 4412 Maple Ridge Court, Hardin County. Phone number. Email. I drafted a message. Ms. Loomis, this is Martin Voss from Lakeview Self-Storage. I wanted to confirm that your Unit D-19 is in order and ask whether you've accessed it recently. I didn't send it. I couldn't figure out how to explain why I was asking without revealing what I'd seen, and I couldn't reveal what I'd seen without becoming the protagonist of a story I didn't control. Instead, I drove to 4412 Maple Ridge Court. It was a ranch house on a quarter-acre lot in a subdivision built in the 90s. Vinyl siding, detached garage, mature oaks shading the front yard. Normal. The driveway held a Honda Accord with a faded bumper sticker and a recycling bin at the curb. I parked across the street at 9 a.m. and sat in my truck and wondered what exactly I intended to do. Knock on the door, say I was from the storage facility, ask if everything was fine with her unit, watch her face when she answered. That's all. Just a data point. Just something to hold against the footage and the silence and the 7 figures and the 2 cameras that couldn't agree on what was real. A woman came out at 9:15, short, grey-haired, wearing a fleece vest and gardening gloves. She walked to the mailbox, retrieved the mail, and went back inside. Normal? Ordinary. A woman in her 60s living her Monday morning. I got out of the truck and walked to the front door and knocked. She answered quickly, within seconds, as if she'd seen me coming. Yes. Ms. Loomis? I'm Martin Voss, the night manager at Lakeview Self-Storage. I was just doing a courtesy check on some units in Building D. We had a minor electrical issue last week, and I wanted to make sure nothing was affected. This was a lie. A smooth, boring, professional lie that Dale himself might have told. She looked at me with the mild interest of a person being addressed about something she barely thought about. Oh, that's fine. I haven't been out there in months, honestly. Everything's probably dusty by now. She smiled. Is there a problem? No, ma'am. Just following up. When was the last time you accessed the unit? She thought about it. October, maybe. I pulled out some Thanksgiving things. I keep meaning to go through my husband's tools, but... She trailed off. The smile dimmed. Well, you know how it is. I understand. And the combination? You haven't shared it with anyone? Family, friend, anyone who might need to get in? The mild interest sharpened slightly. No? Why would I? Just standard security questions, new policy. Another lie. Everything sounds fine, Ms. Loomis. Thank you for your time. I walked back to my truck. I sat behind the wheel and gripped it with both hands. She hadn't been to the unit since October. The combination hadn't been shared. And on 4 separate nights, something had opened that unit from the inside, emerged into the corridor, and returned. The unit was padlocked from the outside. The combination was known to one person who hadn't visited in 6 months. There was no other entrance. The cameras, depending on which camera you believed, either confirmed or denied that anything had occurred. I started the truck and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Patricia Loomis's house receded into the row of identical ranch homes, and I noticed something I hadn't registered when I arrived. Every window in the house was covered. Not with curtains. Curtains have gaps, folds, variations. These were covered uniformly, from the inside, with something flat and opaque that sat flush against the glass. The front window, the side windows, the small window above the front door. All of them. Sealed. The woman in the fleece vest had answered the door within seconds of my knock, as if she'd been waiting at the threshold, and her house had no functioning windows. I drove home. I did not go back to 4412 Maple Ridge Court. Monday night. I clocked in with a plan. I had spent the day buying supplies, 2 more trail cameras, a digital audio recorder, a battery-powered LED lantern, a notebook, not the clipboard. The clipboard belonged to the job, to the route, to the version of Martin Voss who walked a grid and wrote down lock statuses. The notebook was mine, private, a record of what was actually happening written in my own hand, dated and timed, so that if the footage contradicted my memory again, I would have a third source. A tiebreaker. I mounted the new trail cameras in Building D, one at each end of the corridor covering both approaches. I placed the audio recorder on the floor outside D-19, activated with a 12-hour battery. I kept the lantern in my bag in case the lights went out again, and I made one more decision. I was not going to sit in the office. I was not going to watch the monitors. I was going to stay in the corridor from 2 a.m. until the end of my shift. My rounds from 1100 to 1:45 were normal. Every building, every lock, every door, logged and noted. D-19. Secured. At 2 o'clock, I walked into Building D and sat in the plastic chair at the end of the corridor. Flashlight off, lantern off. Just the fluorescent lights and the clipboard on my knees and the notebook in my jacket pocket. I wrote, Monday, 2 a.m., seated in D corridor, lights on, door D-19 closed and padlocked. No sound, no movement. I am awake. At 2:15 I wrote, still here, no change. Tube above D-18 flickering as usual. Faint, teach VAC. No other sound. At 2:30 I wrote, no change. At 2:47 I wrote the last thing I would write that night. I don't know what it says. I have the notebook in front of me now, and the entry at 2:47 is in my handwriting, the same compressed block print I use on the route logs, but it fills 2 full pages in a dense, unbroken stream that I cannot read. Not because the handwriting is illegible. The letters are clear. The words are formed, but they are not words I recognize. They are not English. They are not any language I can identify. They are shapes that my hand made on paper at 2:47 a.m. on a Monday night, while I sat in a plastic chair in a storage facility corridor, and I have no memory of writing them. The next thing I remember is 5:58 a.m. I was standing at the office desk with my jacket off and my sleeves rolled up and the route log open in front of me, and I had completed, according to the log, 2 additional rounds at 3:30 and 5 o'clock, both properly noted, both showing every lock in every building as secured, my handwriting, my abbreviations, my route. 3 hours. Gone. Filled, apparently, by the competent execution of my job duties, by a version of me I don't remember being. I collected the trail cameras and the audio recorder before the day shift arrived. I drove home. I connected everything to my laptop. Trail camera 1, East End, facing D-19. At 2:47 I am sitting in the chair. At 2:48 I stand. At 2:49 I walk to D-19. At 2:50 I kneel in front of the door and press my forehead against the corrugated steel. I stay like that for 4 minutes. Then I stand, turn and walk out of frame toward the office. My movements are smooth, deliberate, unhurried. My face, captured in infrared, is calm. My eyes are open. I look like a man who knows exactly what he is doing. Trail camera 2, west end facing opposite direction, confirms the same sequence. At 2:54, after I press my forehead to the door for 4 minutes, the camera captures something trail camera 1 does not. As I stand and turn away, the door behind me opens. Not fully, a 6-inch gap at the bottom, and from that gap, a hand extends and touches the back of my ankle. Briefly. A contact lasting less than 2 seconds. Then the hand withdraws. The door closes. I did not react. On the footage, I walked away as if nothing had touched me. The audio recorder captured the entire night. I listened to it in my kitchen with headphones on, fast-forwarding through hours of fluorescent hum. At 2:47, the recording picked up the sound of my pen on paper, the 2 pages of unreadable writing, scratching, steady, uninterrupted. Then it picked up the sound of my footsteps approaching the door. Then silence. 4 minutes of silence while my forehead rested against the steel. Then, very faintly, from inside the unit, a voice. Not words. Not exactly. A sound like a voice that had been disassembled into its component frequencies and reassembled in the wrong order. Vowels, where consonants should be. Rhythm without syntax. Meaning without language. It lasted the full 4 minutes. It was speaking to me through the door, and on the footage my face was calm, my eyes were open, and I was listening. I didn't go to work Tuesday night, or Wednesday, or Thursday. Dale called twice. I let it ring. He left a voicemail Wednesday morning. "Martin, I need you to come in, or let me know what's going on. I can't keep the place unmanned." He didn't sound worried about me. He sounded worried about the insurance liability. I spent those 3 days in my apartment doing 2 things: reviewing every piece of footage I'd collected, and trying to read the 2 pages in my notebook. The footage was comprehensive now. 5 nights of recordings across multiple cameras, and the pattern was undeniable in its escalation. Tuesday, a thing emerged from the unit. Wednesday, 2 things emerged. Friday, I appeared in the corridor while simultaneously sitting in the office. Sunday, the door opened while I watched, but only 1 camera recorded it. Monday, I walked to the door voluntarily, knelt before it, and let something inside speak to me while something else touched my ankle. Each night, the boundary between me and whatever was in D19 had thinned. Each night, my conscious self had been less present, while my physical self had been more engaged. The thing in the unit wasn't coming to me. I was going to it. And the version of me that went was someone I had never met. Calm, purposeful, obedient, arriving at the door like a parishioner arriving at an altar. The notebook pages resisted comprehension in a way that felt active. I would stare at a line of symbols, and just as they seemed about to resolve into something legible, my focus would slip. Not gradually, but sharply, as if my attention were being deflected. After 3 days of trying, I photographed the pages with my phone and uploaded them into a translation app. The app returned. Language not detected. I tried 6 different apps. Same result. On Thursday afternoon, I did something I'm not proud of. I called Sandra, and not to tell her the truth. I was past that possibility, but to hear a human voice that knew me, that had known me when I was a person who drove a bread truck and lived in a house and slept at night and remembered every hour of every day. She answered on the 2nd ring. "Martin? Hey. Are you okay? You sound—" "I'm fine. I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. Sandra knew me well enough to hear the weight in that sentence, and I could feel her deciding how to respond. The old calculus of caring about someone you've already decided to care about at a distance. "Martin, what's going on?" "Nothing. Work stuff. I've been off for a few days, and I'm just in my head. You need to get out of that apartment, go somewhere, see people." "Yeah." I mean it. That night shift job is rotting you. You sit in a concrete box alone all night and then you come home to another box alone all day. That's not living. I know. Then do something about it. I wanted to tell her. Not the footage, not the cameras, not the things in the unit, but the core of it. The feeling. Sandra, I think there are two of me, and one of them does things in the dark that the other one doesn't remember, and I don't know which one is the real one anymore. But I couldn't form the words. They were too close to things a person says when they're unwell, and I was not unwell. I was something else. Something the vocabulary of wellness and unwellness didn't cover. I'll be okay, I said. Thank you. Call me if you need anything. I mean it. I hung up. I looked at the notebook. I looked at the laptop closed, containing 5 nights of evidence that my life had forked into 2 parallel tracks, one that I lived and one that I watched. And I made the decision that had been forming since Saturday. I was going back. One more night. And this time I wasn't going to fight it. Friday night. 1 week since the first footage. I clocked in at 11 o'clock. Dale had left a note on the desk. Call me when you get this. We need to talk. I folded the note and put it in my pocket and began my rounds. Everything was normal. Every lock, every corridor, every building, D-19, secured. I completed the route by midnight and returned to the office and sat in front of the monitors. I did not bring the trail cameras. I did not bring the audio recorder. I did not bring the notebook. I brought nothing except myself and the keys and the clipboard, and I sat in the office and waited. At 1:30, I stopped fighting. I don't mean I gave up. I mean I released the clenched, continuous effort of staying alert, of monitoring my own consciousness for gaps, of trying to hold myself inside each minute as it passed. I let go. I sat in the chair and breathed and watched the monitors cycle through their 10-second rotation, and I let whatever was going to happen, happen. The footage I'm about to describe I watched the next morning. I have no memory of any of it. At 1:47 a.m., I stood up from the desk. On camera 2, the office camera, mounted in the corner above the filing cabinet, I watched myself rise smoothly, walk to the door, and leave the office. My movements were fluid and unhurried. I did not take the flashlight. I did not take the clipboard. Camera 5 captured me walking through Building A toward Building D. Camera 6 showed me entering the East Fire exit. Camera 7, the D corridor, showed me walking directly to Unit D-19 without slowing, without hesitating, without looking at any other door. I knelt. I reached into my pocket and produced a key. Not the master key. Not any key I recognized from the ring Dale had given me. A small, dark key that I had apparently been carrying without knowing it. I inserted it into the padlock. The padlock opened. I rolled the door up. The interior was dark. The camera's resolution couldn't penetrate the unit beyond the first few feet, but I could see the boxes, the table, the tarp. I walked inside. The door rolled down behind me. For 43 minutes the corridor was empty. Camera 7 recorded nothing. No sound on the audio track. Just an empty hallway with a closed door and a fluorescent tube flickering above D-18. At 2:31, the door opened again. I emerged. I was walking normally, upright, unhurried. I closed the door, replaced the padlock, and walked back to the office. At 2:38, I sat down at the desk. At 2:39, based on the timestamp on the playback I was watching the next morning, I appeared to fall asleep. Head on the desk, arms folded, body still. I remained like that until 5:50 a.m. when I sat up, rubbed my face, and began filling out the route log for 2 rounds I had not taken. I watched this footage 3 times. On the 3rd viewing, I paused at the moment I emerged from the unit. 2:31, the frame where I stepped back into the corridor and turned to close the door. Just before the door rolled down, the camera captured a single frame of the unit's interior. lit from behind by some source the camera hadn't detected while the door was closed. In that single frame, a quarter of a second of exposure, the unit was empty. No boxes, no table, no tarp, no figures, no Christmas decorations, no woodworking tools. Nothing. A bare concrete floor and 3 bare corrugated walls and a ceiling and a space that contained absolutely nothing except the version of me that was walking out of it. Whatever I had spent 43 minutes with inside that unit was not visible to the camera, or was not there, or was there in a way that light and digital sensors do not record. But I had gone to it. Voluntarily. With a key I didn't know I carried, and I had stayed. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table with the laptop open, and the footage paused on the frame of the empty unit when Dale called. I answered this time. My voice was normal. I felt normal. And that was the part that frightened me most because, by any rational measure, I should have been terrified or dissociating or in the process of checking myself into a facility. Instead, I felt rested, clear, present in my body in a way I hadn't felt in months. Martin, what the hell is going on? You missed 3 shifts and then you just show up last night without calling me back. I'm sorry, Dale, I was sick. I should have communicated better. Yeah, you should have. Listen, are you okay? Because I need someone reliable. I'm reliable. I'll be there tonight. He paused. All right. But I need you to talk to me if something's wrong. I can't afford surprises. No surprises. I hung up and looked at the footage again. The empty unit. My body walking out of it. The padlock closing. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Loomis. She answered after 4 rings, sounding like a woman interrupted during morning routines. Ms. Loomis, it's Martin Voss from Lakeview. I'm sorry to bother you again. Oh, Mr. Voss, what can I do for you? I wanted to ask you something, and I apologize if it seems strange. When you rented Unit D-19, when you first moved your things in, was the unit empty? A pause. Of course it was empty. It's a storage unit. Nothing was left behind by a previous tenant? Nothing on the floor, on the walls, no markings, no anything. A longer pause. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not defensive, not suspicious, something closer to careful. Why are you asking me this? Routine inspection follow-up. We've had some questions about a few units in Building D. Mr. Voss. She said my name the way you say a word you're placing precisely. I haven't been to that unit since October, I told you that. And I would appreciate it if this were the last time I'm contacted about it. Of course, I apologize for the... She hung up. I set the phone down and stared at it. The conversation was over in 30 seconds, but something in the middle of it had shifted. A barometric drop, a tonal change in her voice at the exact moment I asked about the unit being empty. Not surprise, recognition. As if the question confirmed something she already knew and did not want confirmed. I thought about her house, the sealed windows, the speed with which she'd answered the door, as if she'd been waiting at the threshold. The way she smiled during our first conversation, a functional smile, the kind you produce to signal normalcy, not the kind that happens because something is good. I closed the laptop, I showered, I shaved, I put on clean clothes and ate a full meal, eggs, toast, coffee, and I felt fine. I felt better than fine. I felt like a man who had slept 9 hours instead of 3, who had no back pain for the first time in a year, whose hands were steady and whose vision was sharp and whose thoughts moved in clean, linear sequences from premise to conclusion. This was the evidence I couldn't ignore. Not the footage, not the cameras, not the figures in the unit, but this physical well-being that had no source, this clarity that arrived after a night in which I had walked into a locked storage unit, spent 43 minutes with something I couldn't see, and walked out without memory of any of it. Whatever was happening to me in the dark was not hurting me. That was the most frightening thing I had ever understood. I went back Saturday night and Sunday night and Monday night. I continued going back. I stopped mounting extra cameras. I stopped carrying the audio recorder. I stopped reviewing the footage in the mornings. I watched it once, on Saturday, and saw the same pattern, at some point after 1:30 a.m. I stood up, walked to Building D, opened the unit with the key I didn't know I carried, went inside, stayed for between 30 and 50 minutes, emerged, locked the door, and returned to the office. Each time the unit appeared empty in the frame where the door was open. Each time I had no memory of any of it. Each time I woke up feeling better than I had in years. I stopped watching because watching didn't change anything. The footage showed what it showed. My memory held what it held. They had become two parallel accounts of the same life, and neither was willing to reconcile with the other. What changed was the daytime. It started small. On Tuesday, I was at the grocery store, a place I'd been 100 times, and I noticed the overhead lights were flickering. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else seemed to register. A subtle, arrhythmic pulse, nearly identical to the fluorescent tube above D-18. I stood in the cereal aisle and watched the lights for 3 full minutes. And during those 3 minutes, I had the overwhelming sensation that the store was a corridor, that every aisle was a corridor, that the entire built world was a system of corridors with doors that opened from the inside. On Wednesday, I was stopped at a red light and I looked at the car next to me. The driver, a man in his 40s, sunglasses, hand on the wheel, was sitting with his mouth slightly open in a way that reminded me of the figures in the unit. The jaw just fractionally lower than normal, the lips parted, the eyes forward but unfocused. I watched him for the duration of the red light, and I could not determine whether he was a man waiting in traffic or something else entirely. On Thursday, I woke from a dreamless afternoon sleep at exactly 2:47 p.m. and found myself standing at my apartment window with my forehead pressed against the glass, looking at the street below with the same calm, focused expression I'd seen on my own face in the Friday footage. I didn't know how long I'd been standing there. The clock said 2:47, but my alarm had been set for 3 o'clock. I had no memory of getting out of bed. The daytime gaps were starting. I called Sandra one more time. Thursday evening, 7 p.m. She picked up and I could hear a television in the background and the distant sound of her sister's voice. She was at Diane's house. Dinner. Normal life. "Hey," I said. "Martin, hi. Everything okay?" "Yeah, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer." "Okay. When we were married, did I ever do things in the middle of the night? Get up, walk around, talk? Things I didn't remember in the morning?" She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I heard Diane ask her something, and Sandra murmur a response away from the phone. "Martin, why are you asking me this?" "Just curious." "You're not just curious. What's going on?" "Sandra, please." Another pause, then carefully, "You used to talk in your sleep. Everybody does. And sometimes you'd get up to use the bathroom or get water, and in the morning you wouldn't remember. But that's normal. That's just sleep. Was it ever more than that? Did I ever leave the house? Do anything unusual?" "No." The word came fast. Too fast. And then slower. "Not that I knew of." "What does that mean?" "It means I was asleep too, Martin. I don't know what you did while I was sleeping. Nobody knows what anyone does while they're sleeping." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat in the amber light of my apartment at 7:15 on a Thursday evening and understood that the question I'd been asking, what happens to me in the dark, was not a question with an answer. It was a condition. It was the way I live now. There was the Martin who was awake, and there was the Martin who operated between midnight and 6 a.m. with a key to a door that opened onto nothing. Two tenants in one body sharing the space, neither able to meet the other, each leaving traces the other could find but never fully interpret. I looked at the notebook, the 2 pages of unreadable writing. I turned it toward the window where the last of the daylight could catch the ink, and for a moment, a fraction of a second, the shapes on the page almost resolved, almost became language, almost told me what the other Martin had been trying to record. Then the light shifted and they were symbols again, dense and foreign and mine. I still work at Lakeview Self-Storage. It has been 4 months since the first footage. Dale has not mentioned any complaints. The route logs are impeccable, every round completed, every lock checked, every note precise. The daytime Martin reviews them each morning and finds nothing out of order. The nighttime Martin, whoever he is an excellent employee. I no longer review the footage. The portable drive is in the bottom drawer, filling slowly with recordings I will never watch. The trail cameras are in a box in my closet. The audio recorder is in the glove compartment of my truck. Batteries dead. I have stopped looking for explanations because explanations require a unified self to receive them. And I am no longer that. I am a man who lives from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. and a man who lives from midnight to dawn. And the seam between us is the most private place I have ever known. Some mornings, I wake up and my shoes are by the door, laced with concrete dust on the soles. Some mornings, the notebook has new pages filled with the language I cannot read. Some mornings, I feel so well, so rested, so completely present in my body, that I could weep for the gratitude of it. And I don't know who to thank. The corridor in Building D is quiet when I walk it. D-19 is padlocked and still. The fluorescent tube above D-18 finally burned out last month. And Dale replaced it. The new one doesn't flicker. But sometimes, on my morning drive home, I catch my reflection in the rearview mirror, and the face looking back at me has that expression, the one from the footage. Calm, focused, listening. And for a moment, I don't know which one of us is driving.